Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Catherine Ricker, and I am a middle school English teacher, currently serving as Vice President at the Executive Council at the American Federation of Teachers and as President of the St. Paul Federation of Teachers. This past spring, you know that President Weingarten called for a moratorium on test-driven sanctions tied to the Common Core standards, and it sparked a groundswell of support from frontline educators and an array of allies from principals to school board groups. It put a national spotlight on issues that threaten to land the crucial standards and this opportunity in the dustbin of abandoned reforms. An AFT poll found that while 75% of teachers supported the new standards, only 27% said that their district had provided them with the tools and resources necessary to teach to them. I've heard a lot from teachers about their concerns. A number of you have sent me questions via Twitter, and I will be asking our panel a few of those questions today. In addition, we hope to have time for you to ask your questions from the microphones in a little bit. So we do have a lot to talk about today, and we have an excellent panel to help us frame that discussion. I'd like you to help me welcome our first guest, Peggy Brookins. Peggy is co-founder and director of the Engineering and Manufacturing Institute of Technology at Forest High School in Ocala, Florida. She is a fellow board-certified teacher and serves on the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards Governing Board. Peggy is a longtime national trainer for AFT's Thinking Mathematics program. She helped design the Journey to Algebra course and was immersed in the Common Core standards as a member of AFT's review team and the Achieve team that helped develop the pathways for high school mathematics. Welcome, Peggy. Our next panelist is Stuart Call. In 1983, Stuart co-founded Measured Progress as Advanced Systems in Measurement and Evaluation and has served as the company's president and CEO since 1997. A former elementary and secondary school teacher, Stuart worked for the Education Commission of the States, the University of Colorado, and RMC Research Corporation, where he helped generate statewide assessments and directed several state contracts. Welcome, Stuart. Next is Ohio State Representative Teresa Fetter. Teresa has served in both Ohio Senate and the Ohio House since 2000, and she has been a tireless advocate for our children, our teachers, and our public education. A former teacher and AFT member in the Toledo Public Schools, she also served in the United States Air Force and Ohio National Guard. Last year, the governor signed her landmark human trafficking legislation into law, which criminalizes human trafficking in Ohio. So happy to have such a social justice advocate here. Thanks for coming, Teresa.
Pleasure to be here.
Welcome. Also from Ohio, help me welcome Kay Waite. Kay is an elementary school teacher, peer literacy coach, and district instructional planner in the Toledo Public Schools. She is also a member of the Toledo Federation of Teachers. Welcome, Kay. Thanks for being here. Lastly, help me welcome Cynthia Liu to the stage. Cynthia fights to make sure that public school is a true option, making public education live up to the promise it holds for all Americans. Cynthia is the co-founder of the K-12 News Network. As the mother of an elementary school-age child, Cynthia started the network in 2011 because she believed the voices of parents, educators, and students need to be heard. Welcome, Cynthia. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Since released in 2010, the Common Core state standards in math and English language arts have been adopted by 45 states, the District of Columbia, 4 territories, and the Department of Defense schools. Over the years, the Common Core has become the center of education reform conversations at the local, state, and federal levels across the country. Peggy, I'd like to start with you. So these standards are different. They're more rigorous, they are internationally benchmarked, they are focused and cohesive. What do teachers need to do differently? And what does Common Core instruction look like? And where do you see it happening?
Wow, that's a lot. The first part is that what we as teachers need to do differently is learn what our part is, and that means what the standards are at our grade level. The standards have been shifted down. When you look at K through 8, the standards have certain points where you meet a certain, if I've gotten to a point and I say, okay, I've met this demand, I've mastered this, and now I'm going on to the next thing. So K through 8 does that. So take, for example, 5th grade. I leave multiplication and division, and then I get into proportional reasoning in the 6th grade, starting through those middle areas. A lot of those things have been pushed down from the 9th grade into 7th and 8th grade. So we need to be very familiar with the standards and our part of the standards and the focus at each grade level. What does it look like in a classroom? So if I were in a classroom, the questioning would be very different. The focus on the 8 mathematical practices, these are what students need to be able to do, would be an integral part of that classroom. The questioning techniques, how we look at their attention to precision, how we look at structure, how we look at repeated reasoning, and that can only happen when teachers themselves are very familiar with the standards that they teach and why they're teaching them. So if you see something that says, I'm going to start off, I have a concept, and I know there's some procedure along with that concept, I'm going to start developing and giving a balance to concept and procedure. We do a lot of this with the course that you talked about through AFT's Thinking Mathematics. It is an incredible course, and I use it every day, even in my own classroom. And then you say, where do we see this happening? We absolutely see it happening in my classroom. I understand that. We see it happening in other classrooms in Florida. But I think that the biggest place you see it is where people who have been trained properly in what the standards are at their particular grade level, what their focus is, and it's very hard for people to focus in a certain area. With me, I know there are standards that I can leave off because they're not my responsibility anymore. And we know this is not going to happen overnight because there are going to be gaps that will occur. And those gaps can be filled in different ways by knowing what comes before you and knowing what comes after you and what the big ideas are and what the focus is. So classrooms around the state of Florida, classrooms, I know in Rhode Island, I have some friends in the audience that it's happening. And if you get good professional development, it's going to happen there. And I think you should demand good professional development.
Hear, hear. Thank you so much. Cynthia, I'd like to turn to you next. So you recently wrote an op-ed for the San Jose Mercury News. And in it, you echoed President Weingarten's call for a moratorium on the penalties given to schools based on results of the California state tests. What led you to that position, and what ways are parents in California advocating for it?
Well, a lot of things led me to that, Mary Catherine. First of all, what people don't know about California is that our Common Core state standards law is also our P21 law, and so I think there's a lot of excitement on the part of parents hearing about P21, Partnership for 21st Century Skills, hearing that project-based learning and student-led inquiry could be coming back into the classrooms, really, much more engaging ways of learning, and I think there's a lot of excitement around that. But I think that many of us have hesitation simply because there are certain technological pieces that haven't fallen into place. These are computer-based tests. It's a long stretch of the imagination to say that every single school district in the entire state of California, 6.5 million children who have to take these computer-based tests are ready. I don't think that's the case. So there's a question of how that's going to happen. And then also, I think there are student records privacy concerns that parents also have knowing that the scope of what is being collected is much more than simply just test scores, but could be disciplinary records, behavioral kinds of things. So there's some questions around that, and I think that is a little bit troubling. I think also the fact that there's a 12-week sort of testing period. I mean, that's 3 months. So 3 months out of a 9-month school year devoted to testing. And you know, you see the logistical problems of having to test 6.5 million children in the entire state of California. So I think those are some things that really worry us. I think part of what we're trying to do at K-12 News Network is let parents know and let folks know that we have this sort of bifurcated law and that there's good reason to be excited and meet with happy anticipation the P21 aspects, but I think there's still a lot more that needs to be done in terms of figuring out the testing piece and the Common Core state standards.
Thank you so much. This mom in me agrees with so much of what you said. Thank you. So you can see already that even though the Common Core was adopted by a majority of states, implementation looks different state to state, district to district, even school to school, and sometimes it's not pretty. Kay, I want you to talk to me a little bit about implementation in Toledo. What challenges have occurred? What structures have been put in place for educators in your local area to support implementation of the Common Core?
Well, there's a lot of challenges involved with implementing the Common Core. In Toledo Public Schools, we actually initiated the implementation process almost 4 years ago when we won the Race to the Top grant funds. Okay. And as part of the requirement of that grant is to go through this process of aligning the local curricula to the standards, implementing, preparing professional development training for our colleagues, and then also preparing for the new assessments coming. Kind of a big undertaking. And the first challenge that we faced was that there are no guidelines or no support systems in place for actually doing this work. I'm fortunate enough to come from a district that we have great teacher leaders, and we were fortunate enough within our district as well to have teachers who, through the American Federation of Teachers, did work with the writers of the Common Core. So fortunately, we did have some built-in expertise, and that did support the work that we had to go through. We also found a giant challenge because we are implementing the new standards under the Race to the Top grant, but we are still using our assessments for the former, assessments to the former standards that we taught. So we had a huge gap in, there's shifts in instruction, shifts in content by grade level, but they're still being assessed based on the old assessments. Wow. And it was a lot to try to get our colleagues to buy into this implementation process, knowing that they're held accountable to assessments that no longer align. We also then found that our curriculum didn't necessarily, our textbooks I should say, and resources didn't necessarily align to the standards either, because now we know that there have been shifts in what content is taught at different grade levels. But we, in order to put structures in place to support some of this process, our teachers led the work in our district. We started our first year rolling out K-2. We had 48 elementary teachers with our K-2 teachers who did an alignment map for our colleagues, aligning the standards to the resources that we did have available and trying to fill the gaps that did exist, and there were definitely gaps, just by gathering other resources. And then providing that professional development training for over 200 teachers that first year just for our K-2. Wow. That was a learning process for us. I will say we've gotten better as we've gone, and we certainly listened to our colleagues' feedback as we were providing the training for them, because they know what they need, and we listened and wanted to provide the resources necessary. So that's been an ongoing process. The following year, we aligned 3 to 5 and 11 to 12, and we also learned that our colleagues really felt they didn't have enough background on the standards themselves, so we divided the presentations into a set of PD that was just based around the standards themselves before they then got the curriculum alignment maps for their particular grade levels and content areas. And then we just finished our 6 to 10 this last school year and just provided that training. So about 1,000 teachers in Toledo Public Schools have had some training, although I would have to say that we've worked really hard, and I'm really proud of my colleagues for the work that they've done. But I still think even in our situation, teachers don't feel they know everything they need to know, and they're prepared to fully implement with high stakes attached to it at this time.
Right. So even with all of that teacher leadership, and I mean, clearly you can carry off some ambitious work in 4 years with that level of teacher leadership. Right. It still gets down to a lot of angst and consternation around the tests.
Absolutely, absolutely, because it really takes time. I mean, all of us who have been in the classroom know you don't get great at something the first year through. We really need the time to understand what the standards are asking of the students, what strategies need to be used for implementation, how are we going to differentiate the instruction to help the students meet those standards, and they're rigorous, and we want them to be, but we need time to be able to implement them well and be successful.
Absolutely, thank you. So Stuart, I have to turn to you next then. There is this consternation around the tests being developed and tests that have been developed. Teachers are concerned, nervous, even about the new assessments in our states. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the new assessments that are aligned to the Common Core standards?
People love my topic, don't they?
I know, absolutely.
Yeah. First off, the Common Core state standards are solid, and they accomplish several things they wanted to, including focus on higher order skills.
Yeah.
And so the tests are going to reflect that to some extent, but you have to recognize they're still on-demand, relatively efficient, short tests. There's going to be performance components, there's going to be non-multiple choice and so on, but still, you're talking a limited amount of time to do a sampling of a whole domain, a whole grade level of a subject.
Yeah.
And that's quite a bit in a very short time. So some things are going to be lost in that. I'd say, for example, that Park was talking about 3 performance tasks throughout the year, and only the last one will count now. And Smarter Balance had visions, I think, of more project-type things that would go extended days, multiple, many kids working together in small groups, so on. And what you'll see, I think, in the end is shorter on-demand things where they're concerned about security for the high stakes and all of that. And so I think you're going to see a much stronger test than a lot of state tests now. They are going to tend to the higher order skills, but they're not going to go as far as some people would have liked seeing them. And I'm not saying those tests so much, but as far as people would like to see educators going generally.
Okay. What would you say states and districts can do to offset some of the shortcomings of the new assessments?
I'm working on a paper for ASCD talking about game changers in education. And the game changers I like to talk about are performance assessment, formative assessment, and assessment literacy. Performance assessment. It had its day briefly in the late 90s, mid-90s maybe. And it probably wasn't done as well as it could have been. And so what local educators can do is do it right. We're talking about more extended things. I happen to be a project-based learning advocate and performance assessment and all of that. And to me, okay. And to me, that means, first off, it isn't an add-on.
Right.
It's best if it's curriculum embedded. It isn't something you add on to teaching the low-level skills and facts. It's a means of imparting those skills and knowledge also. And so it shouldn't be something that's done in addition to your regular instruction. It's part of it. And that's where we lost some momentum with a lot of things. A lot of folks see performance assessment, formative assessment, all as add-ons. And if you approach it that way, we're lost again.
Yeah.
So curriculum embeddedness is really important. Also, I mentioned assessment literacy. All groups, educators, non-educators, certainly politicians, but we're not going to worry about them.
Right.
And that's something, there's so much expected of teachers in terms of use of assessment. And yet the standards historically have, for teacher education programs, have really shortchanged it. Tests for teachers have shortchanged assessment. And when you see standards, historically anyway, for assessment, they talked about use of the test, but they really don't talk about what it takes to make good tests and to implement them and so on. So there's something really lacking in preparation of teachers, and so big answer, professional development is incredibly important.
It is. I think you really hit the nail on the head that it is all connected when you talk about the high-quality assessments and project-based learning and knowing how to advocate for that, and then making sure that our teacher preparation programs are embedding that in their work. We are connecting this work in every way possible, and we need to. You hit on something else, and often teachers will find ourselves whether it's in a staff meeting or in a teacher's lunchroom or in a union meeting, and say, I wish we had some legislators in the room to hear what we're talking about and to hear what our concerns are. And so we're actually very fortunate to have a legislator, at least one legislator in the room, who takes her role very seriously as an advocate for education and for our students in public schools. So Teresa, it's great to have you here. I want to ask you that what arguments do you use with your legislative colleagues and constituents when advocating for the importance of the Common Core state standards?
Well, I think it's easy to look at our current testing system and accountability system, and many times we hear that teachers are only teaching to the test, right?
Yep.
And that, you know, we have benchmarks and we have time periods and we've got to get this content in 4 months when you used to have 9. You know, it's just really jam-packed, and the parents are very concerned. There's a lot of stress. I think the results indicate that our current system has failed us in that we have tried to apply one size fits all. And we are not, you know, automobiles going through an assembly line, getting tweaked here, getting bent here, putting a part there. And we need to be aware of what we're learning along the way. I also talk about how the curriculum has really thinned out. You know, it's a mile wide and an inch deep. So our children, you're not really getting the content of learning, and the love of learning and the love of teaching is no longer there. So what do we do? What do we know? We know that meaningful instruction works. We know that meaningful assessments are available, and we need to reach that goal. And we have other countries around the world which we can, you know, look to, have examples, and really get into professional development. And also in the colleges of education, you know, my first experience in the classroom, it felt like Little House on the Prairie, you know. And I taught with Kay's mother, and she's a wonderful teacher. And I'm honored and privileged to be here, but no one talked to one another. We gave tests, but then I asked the principal, well, I'd like to see how my students did. Well, we don't do that. You know, so there was no meaningful looking at the results of our teaching. So we have a lot of work to do. As far as trying to get them to cooperate, I really talk about bipartisanship. I've been able to pass significant legislation in human trafficking, and I tie a lot of my human trafficking work with the answer, and that is education. Yeah. You know, teachers are the first responders of seeing a student who may be sexually abused at home, they're missing. Our truancy programs really are not there. We're not tracking our students when they're not there. But I tie it into education, and we need to understand that it's important that we look at this and really apply those things that we do know. There's a lot of work to do, but really bipartisanship is important. They need real leadership for real results if they want them. If they're taking another direction, then I question their motive. Thank you.
So I have to ask, is that a hard sell? When you're with constituents or your colleagues, is it a hard sell?
Well, they're reform fatigued, testing fatigued.
True enough.
You know, the charter schools in Ohio have failed. Generations of students have not been educated. Ouch. And millions of dollars have been wasted and thrown out the door. And they need to take an honest look at the results. Need to take an honest look at where we're going in education in this country. You know, it's a part of, I'm military, so I see it as a national defense. And I shared with my colleague who's the chairman of the education committee, which I probably know you have a question there. I said, you know, if the military were to apply the changes that we have in education over the last 20 years, we wouldn't win a battle, let alone win a war.
Yeah.
Because the implementation is critical, the professional development, the instruction, no profession, lawyers, accountants, you know, you've heard it from this great president. No one would apply this. So your voices are so critical in telling the stories of what it's like in your classroom, and I tell my stories. They drove me out of my classroom to be a legislator. I never wanted to be one. But it was all the mistakes of who are making these, what are they thinking? This isn't going to work. They missed this whole step. So really, you're the key to what will work in this next phase, and our children are depending on you.
Your work educating your colleagues is so important, so thank you for that very much. I would like to check in with Peggy and Kay as well, because it's an education process for all of us. You are taking the responsibility to educate your colleagues in your state legislature. Peggy and Kay, can you give us a couple examples of how you have engaged teachers, parents, students, or other stakeholders in learning about the Common Core? Kay, do you want to start? And then we'll go to Peggy? Okay.
Sure. One of the things that we make sure that we present to our school board each month during the school board meetings, we do a small presentation on the work that we've been doing with our curriculum alignment work and other work that revolves around the Race to the Top grant. We have done some, beginning to do some community awareness outreach programs for parents on the Common Core state standards, what the standards are, what it means for their students, and also what we're doing to prepare ourselves to prepare our students for the assessments that are coming with those, to start building awareness that way. Okay. And then just the fact that within our district, part of the reason that we insisted on having teacher-led work on this curriculum alignment work that we're doing is to build capacity within the district, that we're building experts as we go. They're digging into the standards, they're getting confident with what the standards are asking, so that they can then be advocates for their peers in their own school buildings as well. Because when you come from a large urban district, just trying to meet the masses and get the information out that's necessary is another challenge. So that's one of the ways that we're dealing with it.
Great, thank you. Peggy, what would you add to that? How have you been also educating stakeholders?
So I think it's critical that we educate parents, number one.
Okay.
Because what they're going to see from their kids, what they bring home, when they come and say, well, teacher didn't answer my question. Well, teacher's not going to just give you an answer to something. They're going to question you in a way that leads you to this conclusion that they're looking for and assessing you at the same time. The other thing is educating the public about what the standards are, what the changes are, and what the requirements are within the classroom for teachers, for students, and having them help as well when these children come home with something very different than what they were used to because they're not sitting in a row anymore. As far as educating peers, I do a lot within my district, going to different schools if somebody needs advice about something. I've been fortunate to work with the writers and be involved in a number of areas as far as the Common Core is concerned. So I do have, some knowledge of the Common Core, and I'm happy to spread that knowledge. And the biggest thing is trying to have the district understand the need for quality professional development more than anything, because teachers are the most important part of this entire endeavor. And if we're not educated well, it's not going to succeed the way it should.
Great, thank you. Kay, you offered us such a great reminder that all successful things start and end with real teacher leadership, quite frankly. And Peggy, you mentioning the importance of parents, I really appreciate you bringing that in, because Cynthia, I'd like to ask you, from your perspective, what supports do parents need in order to understand the Common Core and then support their children in learning these standards?
I think we need a lot more education, as you've been saying, and I think that parents will definitely get behind, their teachers. I think there's an incredible partnership, and when that partnership is strong, it really works. So I think there's just a lack of knowledge right now as to what the Common Core is. And in our state, California, the sort of two-headed thing that we're dealing with. I think the other really key thing is that we happen to have a governor who is really great, was in fact honored by the NEA, just the other week.
The year after our governor.
Yeah, so he's definitely a fan of public education, but I think that to sort of give a context for what I'm saying, here in California, we've just got out of 5 years of $20 billion in cuts from the Great Recession. So we've been on a starvation diet, and pair that with 35 years of chronic underfunding from Proposition 13 for public education. So I think parents are really concerned that we want to see, art and music go back into the classroom. we want to, we definitely want to stand with our teachers. We want to see professional development. I think everyone here on this panel has highlighted how important professional development is. We don't want to see it become just another payday for ed tech companies or what have you. So I think just in general, I think parents are 150%, behind that. And those of us in California, after we passed our big Proposition 30, which is now going to put us on better footing for the next 7 years, we're still 48th in the nation in terms of school funding. So I think we parents are very, very concerned that the priorities are the right ones, and that the funding that we're able to get, that we all fought for, parents and teachers side by side, that goes to the right place. And definitely professional development is one of them. So Governor Brown set aside $1.2 billion in Common Core state standard funding to roll this out. But again, the priorities have to be right, because you put a feast down in front of somebody who's been starving, and and they might just go for dessert first. And we need to make sure that it's a well-rounded thing, and it really does go to the kids and to the teachers who'll be teaching them.
Absolutely, thank you. I would agree that parents want to see that our shared priorities get addressed. And Stuart, you mentioned something before about having really high quality assessments embedded in classroom practice, so it is not an add-on. Could you talk a little bit about why it's important that we do integrate effective use of formative assessments and formative assessment practices into our classrooms?
I'm going to steal your thunder.
That's
Sorry,
right.
Kate. First off, there's a tremendous misunderstanding about what formative assessment is. Right. And I blame my industry for it. When the research came out that said formative assessment can have this tremendous impact on learning, basically I accused the publishers of adding the word formative in front of every item in their catalogs. And I'm serious, that really happened. And so it's been translated into more testing. And so, I mean, the number of times you hear quizzes being given, just constantly, and tests being given. Well, there are other ways of gathering information or gathering evidence. It's watching the kids as they're working, it's questioning them, it's doing all kinds of things. And the important thing to remember is that evidence gathering is just one of several steps within formative assessment, and it's an instructional process. It starts with letting the kids know the learning targets, understand the criteria for success. It includes gathering evidence. It includes providing meaningful feedback, not number correct on a 6-item quiz, and descriptive, rich feedback that helps advance learning, and then adjusting instruction. Also involves using peers and self-evaluation, and using peers as resources. So that's where some of that time element can be helped if the students are using other students to gain some better understanding of some of the material. So basically, it's a fact that true formative assessment, the instructional process, has incredible impact on learning, and it isn't just frequent testing. So it's got to be embedded the way I just described.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Kate, did you want to add to that?
Only that I think it is the term formative assessment, and I think that's what Stuart was referring to, is overused and misused. I know even within our own state, what is called formative assessments are not formative assessments, and trying to get a clear definition for all stakeholders of what that really means, and that formative assessment really is the tool that increases student achievement and it drives the instruction that the teacher is given. And it's really the ongoing conversation between teacher and student that occurs that helps that student reach those learning targets that we're talking about. And that can't be bought. It can't be pre-made for you. It can't be given to you and insisted that at this point in time and this date, students need to be at this point. It has to be intentionally placed by the teacher for the students that are in front of them at that given time to help the teacher drive the instruction and the students meet those targets that we're setting for them.
Yeah. You train teachers,
yes.
You support teachers to do the work, and then you trust us that it will get done.
Absolutely.
And then we communicate with parents how it's going.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So Teresa, there's a little inside baseball happening that I actually want to ask you about. So U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan recently announced that the U.S. Department of Education will allow states to request additional time before using the outcome of new assessments based on new standards. Thank you, AFT activists, for making sure he heard that message. So I am told that the 2 education chairs in the General Assembly don't want your state to apply. And they're saying that that would imply that people don't want to move forward with the Common Core. So what is Ohio doing about this?
Well, we're engaged in discussions. I have a pretty good relationship with both chairs, and I really believe that with the effort that you've made and the effort that's going to happen in Ohio, listening to teachers and really using your voices to help them understand that transition is so critical to get the implementation right, to have the assessments done appropriately, that this is our greatest opportunity to get it right. I mean, we had a very combative discussion back and forth in committee. You know, we had amendments flying, you know, in both chambers. We wanted to have that transition. We didn't want to have the testing of the old system while we're preparing for the new one.
Right.
I mean, it just makes no sense at all. No one would ever do this. And I likened this to the military. So I think the last conversation I had, Chairman Stebleton was very open. We're going to have a discussion tomorrow. We're meeting next Tuesday. And, you know, he's very concerned because there's another element here. We had a representative who put in legislation to repeal Common Core. Jeff Beck had a radio show, and that kind of kicked up some dust. So, you know, if we message this right, I think we can get to a moratorium and then be able to say, you know, by having this time to have the correct transition, we're going to have better results, we're going to be successful. So really it's a way for me to measure how serious they are about public education and accountability system.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, good luck with that. I know the clock is ticking on that decision making, so good luck with your August.
Thanks.
Absolutely. I'd like to move to some questions in the audience. We have time for a little bit, and there are 4 microphones, I believe, in the audience if anyone has a question. And while folks are moving to the microphones, I just want to address something that came up on Twitter that we have not had the chance to talk about up here, and that's specifically nonfiction. There's been some discussion around the emphasis the Common Core state standards put on nonfiction. And Kay and Peggy, I don't know if you in particular have something to say about that. I mean, one of the things that I find encouraging about the emphasis on nonfiction is the ability of our teachers then to introduce narratives that have typically been absent, historically been absent, purposefully been absent in our teaching. That we get to bring in a diverse number of voices into our teaching that traditionally were not in a canon that was that really represented the dominant story about or the dominant story in literature or the dominant story of us. And that ability to look to diverse voices, diverse writers for our nonfiction, I think gives us an ability to bring those traditionally absent narratives into our teaching so that all students see themselves reflected in our teaching practice. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that, if the conversations you've had around the nonfiction part, emphasis.
It's interesting because just recently when we were doing one of our community presentations to parents about the standards, that was a huge concern. And one of the questions was, does this mean you're not going to be reading good quality literature anymore and that students aren't going to be reading the classics? And we need to calm that fear that parents have, because there are standards for literature. So we're still reading, you know, fictional pieces. But when we think about our daily lives, the information that you do on a daily basis is informational reading. And so what we're doing is opening that world to the students and helping our students understand that reading for information is a very difficult process, especially for a struggling reader. Narrative makes sense. It's a format that readers know. But reading for information can be challenging because there's so many different structures to informational reading and so many ways that we go about reading for information, whether you're reading online, whether you are reading a text, whether you're reading an article, and you approach that reading in different ways. So what we're doing is saying we need to focus on those strategies to help our students become strong readers of information and confident so that they can approach reading for information just as confidently as they approach narrative reading.
All right, thank you. Peggy, did you?
And you can do that as well in mathematics and in science, which is huge because of the new shift with data and statistics probability. You're going to have to read and read for information and take that information and use those quantitative literacy skills in order to make sense of what's happening.
Thank you so much. I see there is someone at microphone 3. If you would like to let us know who you are and where you're from, and then if you have a question for a specific audience or panelist, let me know. Thank you.
Certainly. First of all, thank you so much for coming. My name is Rachel Carr. I am an elementary school teacher in New York City. I have quite a few friends that are currently homeschooling their children. And my question is, what implications, discussions, whatever the case may be, have been around Common Core for parents that are homeschooling? Specifically, when I was speaking to a friend a few days ago, I asked her what type of measures was the state requiring for her to show that the children had met standards, and she said that all she had to show was that her child was making progress. So I was curious about the homeschooling and the Common Core implications on that for parents.
Sure. I don't know if California or Ohio or Florida, if there is a difference state by state?
I think there's a difference state by state, and in Ohio there's a standard that parents need to meet for their students, so I don't know how it's going to be adjusted, quite frankly. That's a great question and something that we should really look into and be familiar with.
Is there an answer in California?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I think that is one of the huge question marks that a lot of parents have.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that sounds like further research. Thank you. Microphone 4.
Hi, my name is Mary Alice Callahan. I'm from Morgan Hill, California. And I've been teaching since 79, I think. That's a math problem. I'm a math teacher. But not a Common Core problem. And I'm curious if the panelists have suggestions to us as we go back to our locals in what are some crucial and important first steps in developing the capacities of teachers to do this work. Because I have been through both Common Core type testing and not, and have seen how difficult project-based learning really is for many, many people to implement, especially when the materials don't already exist, are not sequenced in any sort of natural progression, and everyone's inventing the wheel, which has been invented multiple times. So I think unions and districts both need to really engage deeply in this issue of professional development in a profession that doesn't give any time to it.
Okay, great, thank you. Absolutely, yeah, let's start with Peggy, and if anyone else would like to add, just again, those critical first steps that Mary Alice is asking about.
So the very first step you can take as a teacher is to read the standards and read them well. Take a deep dive into the standards. If you're not able to do that and you're looking at it and it looks overwhelming from the very beginning, there's something that Jason Zimba has been working on as well as Bill McCallum, and it's the progressions. And now on the web, you'll find the progressions from K all the way through high school now. These progressions have put together that sequence, if somebody was worried about the sequence, of how concepts develop and how they develop over domains. So reading that, the standards are attached there as well. On the site, achievethecore.org, there's some free professional development on there just for teachers. You can go onto that site and read it all for yourself. It educates you on the standards as well as what this would look like in your classroom, questions to ask, different activities to do with your students. So you start getting an idea of, oh, this is what they mean when they say 6EE1.3. If you're doing those types of things and you focus where the standards focus, then that's a huge, huge start into what's happening. We talked about AFT's professional development. Any professional development that's level 3, that people understand what the standards are about. If somebody can't answer for you what is focus, what is coherence, and what is rigor, they really don't understand the standards. So that's the first question I would ask them, and I would know the answer myself before I ask them.
Nice. Thank you so much. That's great first advice. Yeah, from a parent's perspective.
I think the questioner was from California, so I just wanted to let everyone know that with our governor, who is ready to walk out on a limb, I think some parents are ready to walk out on a limb too, and I think it would be great if teachers also got behind the fact that, you know, in our Common Core / P21 law, AB 250, it does say that high quality assessments include performances, portfolios of student work, and presentations. And I think that that is a really great question that she asked. When you deepen the learning, then don't you also need to deepen and broaden the kind of assessment that you're willing to bear? So I think that if you're willing to go out on that limb, I think a lot of parents are willing to go out there with you. And our governor, you know, once again, Jerry Brown, when he was asked to sign off on a change to the Academic Performance Index law in California, which, you know, proposed adding more tests, he basically said no and said, why would you put another speedometer on a broken car? So he pushed back on that, and now we're going to have calculation of API, which is very different, which is only 60% on standardized testing as opposed to 100% previously. So there's 40% now that is going to be calculated on other things, and there's real opportunity there to measure differently and measure deeper.
Thanks for that advocacy. Absolutely. Unfortunately, we are out of time for this Q&A, although I do hope you follow up with some questions on Twitter so that we can continue this discussion. I do want to ask our panelists one final question in the spirit of what Mary Alice was asking as well. What is that most important step we can all take to ensure the Common Core state standards are implemented well? Peggy, do you want to start?
Again,
go around this way?
I feel like I should say ditto. Educate yourself in the standards, what you are required to do at your grade level, so there is a focus. The coherence across grade levels, meaning know what happens before you, understand what happens after you, so that you know why you're doing what you're doing at your particular level. And then the rigor. Rigor doesn't mean harder problems. It means a deeper dive into what you're doing, so that students have the ability to apply the learning, not just saying there's a computational thing that's going on here and I haven't balanced, you know, procedure and concept understanding at that point. And then the last thing is the mathematical practices. Make sure your students understand them, their parents understand them, and they're in your classroom every day.
Thank you. Stuart, what would you say?
Coming from the testing perspective, I'd say 2 words: student work. Teachers have to see student work. And there might be a place for the more efficient tools that are provided everybody out there, the multiple choice item banks and the online testing and all of that stuff, but you've got to see student work. Good formative assessment requires good, rich evidence, which you get from seeing student work, good feedback, which you couldn't provide without seeing student work,
right.
And not to mention it does enable the teaching of higher order skills as well.
Absolutely. What would you say from a legislator's perspective?
I think there are 2 areas. One would be total community involvement. Let them see your success. Shout it on the mountaintops. Bring the media in. Show off your kids. You know, let them know what a great job you're doing and how important it is to maintain what we're doing. Secondly, keep doing what you're doing. Your voices are making a critical difference. Arnie Duncan changed his mind. And I'm not going to stop talking to my colleagues until they change their mind.
All right.
So what you're doing is working, you're key, and legislators need to listen to you. So tell the story of what it's like in your classroom. I have nightmare stories of my first year with 4th grade testing. You know, I had a poster, no professional development, I had to go seek out my own workshop and pay for it. And then there was a whole new topic called Ohio history. No curriculum, no textbook. And the students and I were very nervous. And, we need to instill confidence in this next move. We've got to get this one right, folks. We really have to get it right, and we can get it right with your voices.
That's right. Well, we're going to keep our eye on Ohio and your progress. Kay, what would you add to that?
I would advocate for time for teachers to collaborate. This really is not work that can be done in isolation. It really requires the time to sit and talk and work together in creating good quality common assessments, formative assessments, sharing those techniques, opening our classrooms to each other so we can learn from each other. And that collaboration time is really important. I know there's a piece that our innovation grant teachers use in a lesson study. And that's what that involved. And that was looking at student work. What evidence are the students providing that learning is going on? And then what shifts can we make in our instruction to push them even further? And the time to be able to do that is really critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Cynthia, what would you like to add?
Well, I think just to repeat what I've said before, which is that parents are incredible partners, willing to be there, willing to do what it takes to get that spark back into kids' eyes, to move away from some of the worksheets, because I don't think anyone ever got joy from filling out a worksheet or grading one necessarily.
Exactly.
So yeah, so let's kind of shift the boat. It's time to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you for reminding us the importance of those partnerships with our parents as well. Thank you all for the insightful discussion. Can we give our panelists a round of applause, please? Thank you. Thank you so much for your advocacy, for your work, for your leadership. Definitely, there is so much to talk about here that I do want to encourage everybody to continue this dialogue about the Common Core through tools like Twitter and blogging. We need to get our voice out there and be heard, to echo what Teresa said. Just as an FYI, in the Expo Hall, as part of the Take Action Center, I want to encourage you to sign up to be an AFT Rapid Responder. You'll receive alerts, messages, and we hope you can help us spread our message. I also want to give everyone a heads up to keep an eye out for the USA Today newspaper tomorrow. You should receive a complimentary copy in front of your hotel room in the morning, and you'll see one way that the AFT is getting our message out. And I look forward to seeing everyone tonight from 8:30 to 10:30 at the Welcome Dance in this ballroom. And after that, we will be celebrating the first birthday of Share My Lesson. So from 10 p.m. until midnight in the atrium, you'll have a chance to upload resources while enjoying cupcakes and toasting the evening with celebratory champagne. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you to our panelists again. Have a great conference. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you.